All right, so we're here at the Play Big podcast with myself, but the whole conversation that I'd like to have with people is around playing big in life, playing big in business, and playing big in finances. And I'm actually so excited to be here today. This has been an idea of a podcast I've wanted to have for a long, long time, and there can only be one first episode of the podcast, and I'm so excited. I'm extremely grateful to have you here with us today, Reggie Flowers, a man of great faith, entrepreneur, a husband, a father, a great friend to many people that I know that we have in common. And I'm just so thankful that you're here today. And I'm actually so grateful that you are the first one that's going to be in this long, long series of people that we're going to talk about. But before we get started, could you please just let people know who is Reggie Flowers and what makes you go?
Absolutely. First and foremost, just thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I'm so grateful that you put this together. There needs to be a platform really compelling and inspiring people to go big. And I think that's the thesis in my life. I know you share that same sentiment, and then those who are viewing this are going to be inspired to or help them ascend to a greater heights. So Reggie Flowers, he's a kingdompreneur. He's a husband. He's a father of 5 wonderful children between the ages of 17 all the way down to 9 months. I began as an entrepreneur at 19 years old, right out of college. I was started network marketing. First year was terrible, right? And that was primarily due to ego and pride. You imagine I was broke, but I had an ego. And they just don't go together, right? And by the second year, I found out I was going to be a father, and there was a shift. And that shift caused me to really buckle down, focus on growing, humbling myself, really learning the system. And then from there, I found myself in the top production charts, being a part of the elite within the organization, moving through the organization. And then I fell in love with really impacting and coaching and helping people solve their problems, right? Listen to their stories. Then I got introduced to private equity as well as, venture capital. And I became intrigued with the possibility of seeding capital into promising companies or identifying companies that you could either fix, improve, and then sell. And so buying and creating value was something that became a passion of mine. I'm also an author. So I have a book called The Art of Struggle, depicting the rise, the fall, and then 5 laws that help me rise again. And then ultimately, I'm just a guy that loves life. I'm very grateful for all the seasons, the storms, grateful for the sunshine. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, I'm grateful to be here with you.
That's awesome. You started off by saying you're a kingdom entrepreneur. It's a powerful position. It's a powerful view on life. Yes. What is that? What does kingdom entrepreneur mean to you?
Absolutely. And so I built a brand around Kingdompreneur Mentor because I not only experienced it, but then realizing that there's room and a need for it, where somebody's deeply invested in you being able to build as a entrepreneur or intrapreneur, right? So there are people within organizations, but they want to make decisions. They want to be governed by biblical principles. And so even though they're competing, they're battling, they're going to war with the world, but they're using the governance of God's promises, his principles, right, and the patterns so that when they make the decisions, they're able to look at who's my partner, who am I in business with, right, and using that partnership and that covenant to be accelerator. And I deem that when it's done well, you begin to experience what we define as God's unfair advantage, when you begin to have evidence of his promises in your life. And so now you're taking that to the marketplace, and you're stewarding the resources versus owning them. That's a deep principle too when you're a kingdompreneur.
Man, you put a lot in there, man. When did you first realize that was maybe something God had placed in your heart of not only being an entrepreneur, God can place that in people's hearts. Pursuing God is something that he can place in the hearts. But when did you first realize, man, it's totally, being an entrepreneur means so many different things to different people.
Right.
following God means so many different things to different people, but the combination of those two is a very, what I would call a meaningful, specific
Yes.
purpose, calling that God put on your heart, and you had the courage, you had the abiding ability to be able to follow that. But when did you realize that this was something that was put specifically into Reggie's heart?
There was a realization, and sometimes those realizations come out of tragedy. And so for me, it was the loss of my first business, which was that network marketing business. I began to descend, deaccelerate. And ultimately, that was a combination of full of self, becoming slightly arrogant, right? Believing that you're way better than you really are. And ultimately, when you do that, you begin to separate from God, right? Because you're becoming full of self.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that pause began to happen where there was no more production the way it used to be, I had the skill set and I'm working hard and I'm still not getting results, I realized that there was a clear boundary being established where God needed to get my attention. And it took a while for me to recognize that. So that wasn't a quick, epiphany, but it took a moment. And in that moment, I'm like, okay, well, what do I do next? And again, that season turned into 4 years of like famine. Okay.
Yes.
Like barely any income, struggling. My late wife at that time was working her full-time job to at least cover the bills. I'm seeking jobs. I'm seeking business ideas. And I was actually the actual shift really happened September 7th, 2014. I was leaving the local grocery store called Myers, and I had my 1 and 2 year old with me, and I'm preparing to put them into a Range Rover that I can no longer afford. Okay, and they're hungry, they're tired, and as I'm putting one into the car, I hear a voice say to me. She says, "What church do you attend?" And I turn over and look over my back, and I'm like, "Oh, I go to Word of Faith. And how about you?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm a street evangelist." I'm like, "Oh, that's great, excellent, thanks for sharing." And I'm trying to get them ready. And she says, "Oh, by the way, don't worry so much. Your businesses are going to do great."
Wow.
And I said, "Excuse me?" And I turn around and I'm like, hold on. And at this, you got to understand, I'm in a place right now where I'm so open. I needed a change. I needed a shift, right? I know what God called me to do, and my life and purpose was greater than what I was experiencing. So I was in that place where you're just eager for a hand, a support. And that came by way of an evangelist prophesying to me in a parking lot for an hour and a half.
Wow.
And so in short, she left me with several scriptures. One was Psalms 91, Romans 12, Galatians 6. And that's when I really started studying the word aggressively, because those specific verses were tied to what needed to change within me. And so that was September 7th. And then we moved to December 24th. I'm at the grocery store again, and I run into, her name is Bridget, the evangelist. And we don't have time for me to get to the whole story, but we spoke again, and I was excited. I said, "Bridget, I'm reading scripture. I'm being consistent. I'm praying over my family." And so she prophesied to me again, really just to help me get clarity on, number one, she told me I was going to have a daughter. And fast forwarding, my wife passed in 2018. We didn't have a daughter. I remarried in 2020. We had a son, and then we had a daughter. So that daughter's here now.
Wow.
I had to wait 7 years, and I'm so grateful that she's here. But almost 80% of what she said, or 90% of what she shared with me, has come to pass so far. And so we were on the 24th. She told me what was coming. And she also said, "You know what? You're going to sow a seed into my into my ministry." And we had no money. So again, I'm like, where's this money going to come from? And sure enough, on the 26th, my old company owed me a check. And that check came, and it was right after Christmas, obviously. And we needed that money to take care of bills. And, we robbed Peter to pay Paul. My wife and I prayed, and we decided to sow the entire check because we wanted to let people know, or let God know, that we were fanatical about our faith, that we were going to entrust, that he was going to provide, that we were just going to go to a whole new level in our faith. And as a result of that, starting, January 4th of 2015 began the shift. And it wasn't a quick shift, but you could see the incremental change that was happening. And then it became like a compound effect. And it went from 2015, and the real break happened in 2017.
Wow.
So I had to be faithful for another 2 years. So in famine for 2 years of training and development for 2, right? I mean, 4, excuse me, in famine, 2 years of development. And then in 2017, the break.
What were you holding on to during that time? Because, oftentimes people give up, or they're a poor judge of distance, or the moment from germination of something, or an idea, or a reconfirmation of something that you were kind of seeking already, and that seed gets planted in you in the parking lot, and then you abide and you walk in faith, and you begin seeking. What did you hold on to during that time when you're not seeing results, or the germination, the seed was there, you're not seeing anything, and there's always a gestation period for different things in life. There's Absolutely. 9 months for a baby, and often there's gestation for business. There's different gestation periods, and oftentimes no one's giving you a manual to say, hey, Reggie, it's going to be X amount of months, and then something is going to happen. It's just walking in that faith. What are you holding on to about yourself and about God in that process, where some people would give up, or they would lose faith, or what was it about you that you learned about yourself?
That's a really great question. First, when you hear the prophecy, I chose to believe. And in part of that prophecy was that you're going to rise up to the highest levels of business, and you're going to help move people closer to God. So not only was I called, but I accepted. Then what I held on to was the vision. I always had a vision of my own, of what my life will look like, my family, how I'd be able to provide for them, us traveling. So my shower became my prayer closet. And that was part of my routine to consistently pray. I knew I was going to shower every day. And what I realized is that when I would go into that space and pray, that I would be able to see that future. And sometimes I would shower twice a day, 3 times a day if it was super stressful. But I was able to go there and keep seeing the travel, chartering yachts, hanging out with friends. I was able to see that giving back, sowing into the community. And I would do that frequently. Sometimes those showers would be 30 minutes, but that's what I held on to. And then I would act as if. So I would shop on Zillow or whatever was relative at that time for housing. Same thing when it came to, I've always loved yachts. So I would look at yachts that were 50, 100 million and just envision being there, chartering it, watching my children run, knowing that this is going to come to pass, because if it's helping for others, it can happen for me.
Right.
And so really just allowing God to say, look, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to be patient. And oftentimes, most humans define patience as the timeline that they've defined.
Yes.
And then when they exceed that, they're no longer patient. But when you have to truly be the definition of patience until it comes to pass. So I just got into this until. I'm just going to continue until. And then even when until happened, then you just now have built this muscle to continue until, because you ultimately, there is no max out.
Yes.
Right? It's a continuum of journey. So that doesn't change. And for me, it was a prayer and just seeing the vision consistently.
What compelled you besides Bridget? Bridget saying you're going to sow into my ministry. You're in a moment in time where money is hard to come by.
Yes.
And then you're faithfully during this time praying, and you're walking through, and you're deep in Scripture, and you're getting pulled back closer to God. And then all of a sudden something shows up, a check that you've probably been praying for. You're hoping that money comes to you.
Yes.
The natural human tendency is maybe to say, oh man, my prayers have been answered.
Correct.
And this is the blessing that I've received. What was the decision like to take the blessing that you received and fully and faithfully let go of it, give it back? Not a third of it, not a half of it, but 100% of it. One, what was the process like? And then two, what did it feel like, or what was the feeling when you handed her that check and you let it all go? So you received this blessing, all of a sudden you let it all go.
Yes.
Walk me through that, man, because I think that's awesome.
The process, having a great mate helps too, right? So I was married to a woman of faith, God rest her soul. And so while we're discussing this, she asked me, what do you want to do? And for me, the process was clear, the importance of obedience, because prior to this, I had become disobedient, right? I wasn't following the Holy Spirit. I wasn't in scripture, right? Again, so now like I'm in the season of obedience, and the dream has always been bigger than that check. So if we're gonna play big, let's play big.
Yes.
Okay. And so when the check came and she had already kind of gave me the heads up, I knew that's what God was communicating to her. Will he be faithful? Will he be obedient? And so that was for me to demonstrate my obedience and my faithfulness to our faithful creator as me being the faithful creation.
Yes.
So the timing of it, I had the check come before she told me that natural order probably would have happened. But she told me prior to, which means that she knew through listening to the Holy Spirit it was coming. She didn't tell me what was coming. And I knew that why would I shortchange God? Like, yes, but if I really believe that he's the creator of all, that he can turn things around, that he can help me get through anything, like if I really believe that, what's the best way for me to demonstrate that? It's just sowing 100%, not 50%. This is not like I'm going to allocate a portion of my capital, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to invest 100%. And then when she prayed over it, the multiple she placed on that prayer, I was grateful that I sold 100% because I'm like, wow, when that comes to pass, we're going to be in great shape.
Yes, that's amazing, man. That's an amazing journey. You mentioned your late wife. Can you walk me through, because this is also happening during you just came out of famine. Now things are progressing into the right direction.
Yes.
Getting your legs back under you, seeing the promise of God, the real experience of it. It's like what you said is you want to be able to give people be able to show people the tangible results of what God can do, and that's happening for you.
Yes.
And then someone that has a deep faith that's helping you walk through this whole journey, all of a sudden is now not there as part of your life. What is that like? I mean, that's just I can't imagine it. But what is going through your mind at that moment in time, especially now as your faith is stronger?
Yes. I mean, sometimes it's hard for people to even digest. But because you heard the loss of the business, and then the realigning faith and realigning with God, it prepared me. Okay. So what I'm going to share with you and those that are listening, that previous storm helped me because this is sometimes hard to understand. So I'm going to kind of take it back to 2016 where we're chucking along. We know something's coming. It hasn't come yet, but it's rearing its head, right?
Yes.
There's movement and there's excitement.
You can smell it. You can see it.
Deals are piling up and some are moving forward, some are not. So we're sorting. We're just kind of like, Lord, we know it's on its way. And again, I was in the shower, having prayer, and I got this vision of the children and I having a great time without my wife.
Wow.
And I'm like, it kind of startled me. And keep in mind, I had an amazing marriage. So it wasn't even like me not wanting to be with my wife or us divorcing. Like none of those dynamics were even on the table. And then I shook it off and I just said, the enemy's trying to startle me. I'm going to not condone this. And then the next day, the vision came again. And so I told one of my dear friends who was actually here in Atlanta with us, he was aware of that vision. I never shared it with my wife. But then in 2017, about second quarter, right around August, so third quarter, one of the biggest deals happened for us.
Wow.
I look up, and now we have over, $1 million in an account, okay? So I'm talking about a radical increase. I subconsciously made the decision to ensure that my wife saw the world. So we went to Europe, we did Asia, we did the Caribbean. I mean, we did about 50,000 miles. I wanted her to see the entire world.
Wow.
And on our return flight back from San Diego in January of 2018, she sneezed 3 times. And it was rare, but I was sensitive because I knew the vision. And I was like, And that was in January. February, she had a heart attack that was virally induced, called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. So they gave her thinners. And then in May, her equilibrium was off. She was kind of dizzy, and we're preparing for another trip heading to Miami. So I was like, hey, let's go to the hospital. Let's just get this checked out before we head down to Florida. We entered in on the 29th of May, and we actually didn't leave the hospital until July of July 19th. Okay. So we were there almost 60 days. And when she walked in, she was a fully functioning human being. When she left, she was blind. She was a paraplegic. The cancer had metastasized into her meninges, so her spinal fluid. And it's like the black sheep of cancer. And so that in that season, there was such a calm and a peace and an awareness within me that allowed me to navigate the doctors effectively. Like for me to let them know, like, hey, we're on the same team in a way, but I'm also a threat. I need you to take great care of my wife. And then when they told us that there was a prognosis of maximum 4 months, I shut down everything business-wise, and I became her full-time caregiver for 4 months.
Wow.
And I'm talking about if she was incontinent, feeding, doctor's appointments, carrying her up and down stairs, right, because she can no longer walk, physical therapy, all the different therapies that she had taking place. And it was very enriching because part of having fanatical faith, you have to have true and complete trust in God, like you do. So I didn't question. Secondly, I was grateful. I was grateful that we had 5.5 years together. I was grateful the man she helped shape me to be. I was grateful for the 2 little boys that she gave me. I was grateful for the life that we had. And I realized that there's seasons, and I was realizing that our season was coming to an end. But for me not to be angry about it or be discouraged, but to be present and really enjoy what we had. And so I was with her till she took her last breath. And on that same day, I had the responsibility of being very intentional that when those little boys, when I picked them up from school that day, because when they left that morning, their mother had just went to the hospital, the ambulance took her. So in their mind, they thought she was still asleep. And when it was time to come from school, I had to be intentional because that first conversation was going to really set the trajectory of their lives.
Yeah.
And so I prepared that whole day. And that was the toughest, to know that I was going to have that conversation, that when they get home, your mother's not there. And I had the foresight, through the grace of God and one of my mentors, to actually record that conversation.
Wow.
I have that conversation.
Wow.
And I'm going to make sure I let you hear it, because establishing that their mother's assignment was fulfilled and that she was fortunate enough to now go home was a totally different trajectory in their thought process. So we fast forward today, they're both straight A students. They have a thriving summer business. Socially, they're doing well. They're just sound young men, and I'm just really happy. And just trusting God, getting that wisdom, that guidance, because I didn't have it. It came from me just being conscious of Holy Spirit saying, hey, you need to call your mentor, or you need to do this, and just being obedient, right? And then I really didn't, my tears came to my eyes the day that we got into the car after the funeral, because I was locked in. I was present. Yeah. I was, grateful. And so I had my time to mourn, but the mourning was a happiness because I was happy for her, because the way her body was at the end, that wasn't her. Brain surgery. We used to joke and call her Chris 2.0 because after the brain surgery, she was different, right? So it was a transformational experience, but the prior loss helped me prepare for this loss and to navigate it as a true man of faith. And that's why I came out and was able to continue. And then God blessed me. He increased me for my faithfulness. So at that time, we had 3 children. Now there's 5.
Yes.
At that time, there was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo. Now there's 5 bedrooms, 6 baths, 2 kitchens, right? He increased me. He increased my businesses. He increased me for being faithful. So there's no regret on how I approached it. I knew that's what he expects from us, and I wanted to be obedient to that.
That's amazing. What's currently going on in your life that you haven't expected, or that you have expected, but it seems like these markers in your life? You are highly intelligent, highly disciplined, highly committed, highly faithful. So in that, there's things that you expect. You expect good to happen. You expect your ability to create. You have experience of it. You have evidence of it. You walk in faith. You've gone through storms that most people couldn't walk through. 1, a business failing, 2, a loss of a loved one. Being able to keep moving through that and get remarried, have a beautiful marriage now, more children, a strong family, a strong faith, strong businesses. What's currently going on in your life now that either you expected this should happen for Reggie, or that is unexpected, maybe in a good way or a bad way?
I think it's actually in the season of unexpectedness, or the expectancy, that all I've decided to do was just say, take me where you need me, God, right? And what that does, it puts me in a state of stewardship where I know that I'm going to have a very rich life, that it's going to be very filling and fulfilled with great memories and great experiences. But it's now not to the place where it's so definitive by me that I can always tell a person. Just even coming down here, I had no expectations other than I know I was supposed to speak, right? And that's changing. Next thing you know, we're looking at houses, and people are sharing their visions with me. I'm learning more about what you guys are doing. So the flexibility of faith, right, allows you to move and carry less in your suitcase, right? To do things with less baggage, and so you can be nimble and be faithful to what God needs you to do. So for me, that unexpectancy would be, I didn't expect that this podcast would be so cool. Okay, this is like such a great setup. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect to walk into such a warm environment of people, And then in terms of season of my life, I there was a time where I was thinking just recently that because I was focused on really supporting God's people, leveraging our nonprofit organization, that I thought that maybe I'm getting ready to kind of wind down the investment side of things. So I wasn't expecting the idea, as I mentioned to you, of being able to hire someone that's stronger than me, better than me in the capacity of finance, that worked for a billionaire and managed his, company, a $4 billion portfolio. Now it's going to more likely be my partner. I didn't expect that. So that just goes back to the attributing God of being faithful to him, and then he knows what you need and when you need it. And so you just got to kind of stay flexible and hold your values loosely, right?
What do you think holds most people back from being that flexible, or like what you said before, is like early on your ego got in the way? I think oftentimes people are in business, or in the world that you're in big finance, big investments. You're talking, there's it's the eat shark world. Business can be mean and nasty and tough. People want to have a bravado or an ego about them, because I think that's the main thing that needs to get done, is just being tough. And but there's also a way to fight being tough in faith. But what do you think holds most people back when things are going good, to want to be more in control and not being so flexible, or not having the internal compass? What do you think that is for most people?
It's rooted in fear. So if we kind of just navigate that word and some of the supporting attributes like anxiety, self-control, you can think about from the perspective of full of self, right? It becomes a very selfish mentality, right? Where you're just thinking about what other people may want from you. And then sometimes it's also having experiences and not processing those experiences well. So now you've gotten to a place where you're in control and no one can hurt me again, right? I mean, it's always rooted in some type of form of hurt, trauma that was mismanaged, wasn't well processed. And so therefore it shows up in those attributes that you just described. But ultimately it's really, when you look at, for example, one of my philosophies in business is, number one, all transactions are backed by people. And that as long as I trust God, I don't have to worry about mistrusting people. So I don't have to enter any relationship fearful. I don't have to enter in any relationship worried about somebody doing something they're not supposed to do. It would be revealed. And last night I was having a conversation with a gentleman that we're bringing into the organization. And he was like, you can look at my resume. You can put up against anyone, Reg. I can trade against anyone, like whatever you need. And I said, when you're dealing with a kingdompreneur, it's a little different. We have a vetting process, right? We still look at numbers and facts. I said, but beyond that, I don't have the fear that you're describing that causes people to want to do those additional steps when it's only going to be one or two outcomes. Either you can do what you demonstrate or you can't.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
And so it's my responsibility to say, okay, if I'm going to have you trade, let's just say $2 million, let's see what happens with 250 and then incrementally increase, right? That's my responsibility. But the gambler wants to put in the entire two, and you told me that you could do this, and if it doesn't work out, now I got to blame you.
Right.
So it's just a different philosophy and comfort where you're looking a person in their eyes, you're sensing your spirit to see if there's any discomfort. Are our values aligned? Are they not aligned? And just from a core base, am I feeling good about it? And can I look back and say, hey, did I do the appropriate due diligence? And if all those are yeses, then I can move forward and trust and say, hey, I'm giving you an opportunity. And if you create that, I'm not going to hold on to that and then transfer that. I mean, just think about dating. We always tell people you can't bring the past relationship into the new one.
Right.
But then we don't want to take that into business or general relationships. It's no different.
Right.
So whatever happened in the past, hopefully you've learned from it. Because in order to get the blessing, you got to get the lesson. Okay? No lesson, no blessing. Okay? So did you get the lesson so we can get blessed together?
Yes.
If not, we got to go back and work on the lesson.
In business, you walk such a strong faith. You proudly bring it up, just like what you said is explained to this gentleman. I'm a kingdom entrepreneur.
Yes.
Some people may or may not know what that means, or they may have heard of it. But in business, in particular, when you're going and creating the next move or the next project or the next business venture or whatever, how does that come across to other people that you're in business with or that you're partnering with that may not have that same philosophy, or maybe in a different part of the world, or maybe their belief system is totally different? Are there struggles or challenges there that people question it, or how do you handle that when someone's maybe seeing that as, I don't know that I want to get involved in that?
And so are you saying from a standpoint of being centered around faith or being multifaceted?
Both. One, because business is business. At the end of the day, business is business. People will look at business, bottom line business. I'm doing this to make a profit. Your understanding would be very similar to mine. Is I'm doing it for a kingdom, and I expect something to be left over. When that something is left over, it's going to multiply because it's
principle.
It's principle.
Yeah.
And so if you have other partners, other people are involved, like how do you navigate through that for you?
Well, now I'm in a season where I get to kind of choose, which helps. But when I wasn't, I learned to be respectful of other people's values, but not necessarily internalize them. And so therefore, I remember the first big transaction I was involved in 2015, father-son individuals, they didn't share those beliefs. Okay, they're very sophisticated businessmen, but they didn't share those beliefs. And so ultimately, majority of our interactions were conducted around operations and business, and so it was easy. But sometimes when there's decisions to be made, their decisions and mine, we weren't in agreement. And so it was stated, it was written, it was clearly, because if it was a vote, they had majority, but it was clearly defined where I stood. So that if something ever went to trial or we were audited, it was very clear my position. Okay. But in the guise, like you said, of a partnership, things will move forward sometimes, even if you're not in agreement. Now, as long as they don't clear boundaries where ethically now I have to get out of here, then I'll walk away. And that's what stewardship allows you to be able to do, is to walk away from deals, no matter how large they may be, no matter how lucrative they may be. And then what I've learned in those experiences is that oftentimes, when you're praying to God for protection, he often shuts it down anyway. And then you find out the deal didn't get done, so you don't have this fear of loss. And there's also times that you become mature enough where you realize that even if it's a good deal, I still may not need to be a part of it. Here's a quick story. So a dear friend of mine, right, I backed him in multiple transactions. A friend of his found some paintings at a thrift store, okay? There's 14 of them. And they happen to be authentic John Michael Basquiat's, which means that the woman was selling the paintings for anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 a painting. But each of those paintings minimally were $1 million
Holy cow.
plus. Okay?
Wow.
So he was able to buy all those paintings, and he came to me. And again, this is when money was tight, but I just got a business credit card, $7,000 card. And I'm like, I'm buying one of these. Now, we hadn't had them authenticated yet. There was no provenance just yet.
Mm-hmm.
But, so that's the risk.
Yes.
And so I called the bank and said, I'm going to do a $7,000 transaction. And they said, okay, it's good to go. The lady on the other end, this is in Missouri. She runs the card, denied. And I'm like, let me call you right back. Call the bank. The bank says it's good to go. I call her, denied. So then finally I was like, I'm going to get you and the lady and the bank on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So they get on the phone together, they're talking, and they're like, try again. Denied. The woman's like, I don't know what's going on. And I remember sitting back and looking at my bride, and I said, we're not supposed to be in this deal.
Mm.
So I said, we're not going to do it again. And my friend was like, are you sure? I said, listen, I'm sure this is going to work out really well, but for whatever reason, God is telling us we're not supposed to be in it. Now, we end up needing that credit card to take care of some bills.
Wow.
And that collection today, he ended up getting close to 40 paintings that are valued at over $150 million. Okay?
Holy cow.
And to this day, I never felt bad. I never felt like a loss, because I always know that if I'm living righteous and I'm living the right way, if God wanted me to have a piece of that, he would have positioned me to.
Right.
So I didn't think I did anything wrong. I was being punished. I just wasn't supposed to be a part of the transaction. Why? Because it took a long time for it to mature.
Right.
They just started maturing now. So this is probably like 5 to 6 years later. We needed the money to survive during that season. We weren't in a position to take advantage. So having the maturity to recognize that. And I think there's a second part to your question. I think I want to make sure I haven't missed it. But the bottom line is that that's how we handled that process with people, and realizing that they may see it differently than we see it. And it's okay. It doesn't mean that we can't do business together.
Right. Yesterday, we had an opportunity to spend some time together. At lunch, you were talking about you recently were at an event. You had an opportunity to speak.
Yes.
You spoke on a subject called grief.
Yes.
And I think that it moved you in a way that seemed to open up your eyes or
Yes.
your heart to something. Equally, the people that heard it or that have heard the message that you put out online or wherever.
Yes.
It's a conversation that most people don't want to have, or they don't know how to move through it, or they don't know how to navigate the waters of grief. And if you haven't gone through a similar situation with somebody, or you personally haven't gone through that situation, that it could be a challenge. It could stop most people.
Absolutely.
But what about that recently has lit a flame or a
Like an
spark,
awakening almost?
some sort of spark inside of you? Go, oh, man, like this is something I need to really, really, really talk about.
I think the facts are sometimes people think because we're businessmen or women that we're automatically assuming how can we monetize everything. And there's just the reality is that when you get to a certain place where you're just navigating carefully, you're not looking at everything as a way of making money. And so I never looked at that story as a attribute for helping people with grief, or taking that story and creating a course or educational platform to teach people. But it took someone else hearing that and saying, the way you manage your grief with your wife challenged me as a man, as a Christian. Like, I want you to speak on that. And so I said, I never really looked at it that way. But that's part of being open.
Yes.
That's part of being receptive, and having good counsel around. When you have other people that you respect highly, just like I respect you, I respect that gentleman. So I value the thoughts, I value the inputs, and then I process those things along with prayer. And what I realized was that example happened to be a great example that if you are defining yourself as a person of faith, a Christian, a variance of Christianity, even Catholic, being Catholic, that if you truly step in faith, how am I to behave when our brother or sister now goes home? Like, what is my true behavior? Is it because you may petition for something different, you may not be in agreement, but if I'm truly going to behave selflessly, what does that look like? And that's what was represented in that season, was someone trusting, being selfless, being grateful, and then having the wisdom to say, why not me? How come this is happening to me? And going in internally. And I actually just sent him a message and said, how do you recommend I approach this? Because again, this is something that I just offer through our nonprofit and help get some supporters to raise some additional funds so I could just provide these services to people. Do I create a course, that it's either free, or should I have people pay so they can actually use it? And then I started thinking about, like, who can I really be of service to? And more than likely, it's going to be people that are similar to me, that are either entrepreneurs that have a greater responsibility currently and cannot be in a position of being stuck. Because that's where I was at. I couldn't. I had 3 little humans. I had to get the businesses get back going, right? I had a major responsibility, and to sit there on the couch and be in a uniform watching television wasn't acceptable. It wasn't going to, no one was going to benefit from that. So I think that just helped me really think about it and say, you know what, I can help people and so here's what's happened as a result. And again, just all God. My neighbor, his wife has been battling cancer. And when she first got diagnosed, I had a very tough conversation with him. And tough in the definition of, I said, listen, you're a man of faith, and I know she's a woman of faith, but we have to understand that God has the final say, and he determines how this journey is going to be completed, right, this season. So I want you to prepare for her being healed right here on earth and being a great servant to her and giving her whatever she needs. But I also want you to be mindful that if he calls her home, you all have a 6-month-old, and there's going to be that responsibility. You need to understand her promises, her wishes. And trust me, whenever you mention this, the fear of death steps in, even to people of faith, because they're not seeing the benefit of going home. So he heard that conversation. He disregarded it. And then she had her chemo, literally completed chemo April this year. And then the cancer returned a couple months ago, or actually a month ago, and it came back mutated and aggressive. And she just passed, last week. And while he was in the hospital with her, when she had one more day, he said, I need you. And that was kind of the additional confirmation that I went in and I'm looking at the family, and everybody's crying, which is expected. But the conversation I'm having with them, and I actually took my notes because I'm like, I need to write down these thoughts because they're coming naturally, but I want to remember. Because when you're in flow, you know how it is sometimes you don't remember how Holy Spirit used you. I don't want to not remember. And I was letting the mother know, I said, listen, you get to choose how you tell yourself this story. And this story can be as something that aspires you and inspires you, or it could be something that becomes an anchor, a suitcase that's packed full of negativity. I said, you get to choose. So what I want you to do right now is tell me about Kelsey when she was a little girl, and her face lit up and she's taking me through these memories. And I wanted her to see the memories, to remember how great her daughter was. And I told her, I said, listen, you got to remember there's an opposing force that wants you to curse God, to remove yourself for God. And I said, you can't give him that. No matter how much pain you're feeling, no matter the sorrow that's in your heart, trust that God will comfort you. But that enemy wants you to blame God. And then you'll carry this. And I said, and then you won't be any good to your grandchildren. You won't be any good to your spouse. So I'm having these types of conversations, and you can just see the light bulbs going off. Like nobody else is communicating to me this way, right? There's people coming and everybody's crying and how bad. And it's interesting that oftentimes people will come into that environment and tell bad stories too, right? You see that?
Yeah, of course.
They'll come in and talk about another person they know who just died, and the person is still alive. It's like, no, please stop. No. That's not how we can connect. Let's do it a different way. And seeing their responses of basically what was kind of contrary to the expectation of communication in that moment, and their receptiveness kind of told me people need this hope, this faith in the moments like this from people that have lived it, and are speaking from rooted truth, biblical truth, and not, projecting a facade.
Right.
Like all my friends that were present in that season watched me conduct myself this way. So there's no one's gonna pop up on the internet like he was screaming like a baby, he's lying,
Right.
So that's what's happened now. It's kind of an evolution. It's not still, it's in pottery. It's not formed completely, but it's happening.
It's happening now currently. And what else is happening now currently that you're most excited about with what you're doing?
I'm excited that I'm getting back into the season of being of service to others. Like I really am. I really am. Like I like sitting down with people, hearing what they're working on, listening to some of their problems or seeing some of the patterns. Like I'm a pattern guy. I see patterns, I find solutions, and I often have things that sometimes not everyone else sees, right? That's some of our gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And then being able to say, hey, what do you think of this? Right? And then let's implement this. I realized that was going to start happening, so I started putting the right leadership in place within my organization, so I had more flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that me being with people is important. If I'm not with people, like when you're buying and investing in companies, you're engaging with people, but you're not with people,
Right.
You're not having intimate conversations with people. You're not hearing what they aspire to do or wanting to know how do you move through this, like this exchange we're having right now. And so I'm just trusting God that he's kind of moving me in a way where we got the nonprofit, where we're identifying board members, and we're just being patient to him sending the people to say, hey, just like you talked about yesterday, I want to help.
Yes.
How can I help? Right.
Yes.
And just being, and that way I know that I didn't choose that person, God did. And so therefore I know that there's going to be fruit that's going to come from it, whether long season or short, there'll be fruit because that person was led. And so, I just know that right now in this season, there's people, I have good friends like yourself that are creating these massive opportunities and global domination. Somehow, some way, I'm supposed to help. I don't know. Sometimes it's a conversation. Sometimes it's a full out involved. You just don't know. You let God work it out. But when you see people are moving the kingdom forward, I just know that if it's kingdom based and that the leadership recognizes that they're being led that way, you support that because the end goal is just bringing more people, right, to Christ. And that's all that matters, right? So it's financing the kingdom, transferring wealth from the wicked to the righteous, just getting people in position to combat all this craziness that's going on right now on the planet.
It's a crazy time.
But we need capital.
Yes.
Part of that is capital, being capitalized to combat, so the same thing the enemy's using to pollute, man, we got to use that same weapon to restore and refine and filter out.
Speak to me about servanthood.
Okay.
You mentioned it yesterday.
Yes.
And in everything you're describing and how you are and how you operate. You made a very important distinction yesterday of moving and then moving into servanthood. What is servanthood to you, and how is that becoming the next evolution of Reggie's walk with God?
So I used the example yesterday when I mentioned that that Faith Over Fear event, how I felt led to donate tickets, right? So purchase tickets, give those tickets away so that people could be blessed to go. And then not say, okay, by the way, I want this. Not I'm doing this for your event, or can I speak? There's a time when there needs to be an ask, and there's a time when you're supposed to be of service. And when you're to be of service, that means that you're not expecting the reciprocity to take place in that place of service. So we're helping people really move from a place of being either renters in the kingdom, owners, to stewards. And that progression is very similar if you just look at real estate, like the behavior of the renter with that property, okay? The owner, how they behave. But the steward of the property versus the owner, the difference is the owner has wisdom, some understanding, but the owner has understanding and knowledge, but the steward has the wisdom. They understand how to take that knowledge and wisdom and to deploy it effectively. And so distinction of knowing, like you said, when to ask, because we have value, right? We're business people. So when you provide a service, when you're providing IP, there's a value there. But a steward understands when I'm being led to contribute. And one of the philosophies that my current wife says is, listen, you're actually, it's my late wife, excuse me, that the blessings, I mean, you want to be under the spout where the blessings come out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And she also would say that you're not going to always reap where you sow. So when you understand that philosophy, that I may sow some good seed here, I may contribute well here, but I don't have to expect to reap here.
Mm-hmm.
Then it allows you to sow gracefully. It allows you to sow without expectation. And therefore you can go home and not feel like you were taken advantage of, that you were used. And so getting people into a place that had a distinction of recognizing when I'm supposed to do a transaction,
Mm-hmm.
or when I feel led that say, hey, how can I help, right? There's a distinction. And then the person receiving that, you don't have to worry about if they're a good vessel or not. That's not up to you.
Yes.
That's between them and God.
Mm-hmm.
So you can sow. So teaching people to get to a place of stewardship, I just feel like we'll do a greater job with the resources. Whether that's our time resource, our capital resources, relational resources, we'll do a greater job when we realize like it's not mine. Because when we get into the selfish nature, we just get disillusioned with our decisions. Suboptimal decision making takes place because of emotional limitations. But when you're steward, you're free of that because you're like, okay, if something happens here, great.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't, I know I'm going to be blessed later. I can continue to move on with a cheerful attitude, and that makes a big difference.
Man, it's I could try to have a conversation about two specific things that you just said there, man. It is extremely, extremely powerful. Two particular things of what you just said.
Yes.
Number one, sowing without expectation.
Yes.
That is a powerful position to take. Sowing without expectation. And then you also said sometimes where you reap is not where you sow.
Yes.
Just in the last couple minutes that we have,
Sure.
I at least want to understand that a little bit. It's a much longer conversation, but man, if you could just dig that out a little bit, because I think most people do something with this expectation. I'm doing this because I expect this back. Or because I'm sowing here, I also expect it to come back from here, as opposed to understanding something greater is going on, walking in faith, the way that you've been moving for multiple years,
Yes.
Being obedient, not being expectant, but always knowing that God moves things for good, and that you have evidence throughout your life, and in particular the last several years. It just explained to me what that is, yeah, and why most people maybe have a hard time with that. Even if they do have a deep faith, it's still the human nature, ego side. Is like, man, I'm going to sow here, I reap here, I sow, I expect.
Well, it's a limiting belief, right? And the belief is that if I don't get an exchange, right? Because number one, that's a person that although they may say that they have passive income or residual income, they're still a linear thinker. That's part of it too, right? So everybody thinks the physical currency is the only currency, but then there's also the biblical currency. And so when you really believe in the biblical currency, then you can move with these principles comfortably and not feel like you're being robbed. So majority of people are thinking that, okay, if I'm going to provide you my IP, my ideas, right? Well, first off, if you don't have to do it,
Yes.
okay? But if someone's asking you for help and you can do it, and you feel like you shouldn't do it because you won't make money off of it, is there a lack going on in your life? And they may have bank accounts full, but there's still a lack. And sometimes that lack has nothing to do with business. It's a lack of person. It's a lack of spirit. There's a lack within them. But when you're full of abundance, this conversation, this 2-hour conversation, this 1-hour conversation is not going to change the trajectory of my life. And if it blesses you and all it does is multiply on, that's okay. But if I'm looking at you as like my source, and that's what happens too, is that as people aren't seeking God as their source, they're looking at the person they're transacting with as their source. So they put all this energy, all this expectation into that source. And when they realize that that source can fail them, then they're hurt. And so now they're trying to transact with everyone. And there's no one, because what I've experienced in my life is people always tell me, Reggie, why'd you give them that much information? You should be charging them for that. And I will often say, I didn't feel led to not give them this information. I mean, I sat in a room yesterday with some of your team for several hours, and I never once thought, what am I going to get for this?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
I was excited about the process.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you guys can go to 10 billion. I know it. Like, here's some things I would recommend you consider, right? Here's some things I would recommend how you implement, how you know, but you got this. Go for it.
Yes.
Not, you got this, so what are you going to give me?
Right.
And for me, it doesn't even feel right. So I think we just got to help people get whole again. There's books to be whole again. The Bible can help you become whole again. Getting around good counsel to be whole. Because when you're whole, you shouldn't be out trying to, it's like when people say a man, you shouldn't be dating if you're broke, right? Because how are you going to demonstrate provision when you don't have money to do it, right? So just be patient enough to have not short-term thinking, but long-term thinking. And I just think that then you can sow and just know that I'm going to reap. And I think that's the investor mentality from a faith-based structure. As I'm thinking about it out loud,
Yes.
it's really now you're making an investment that I don't expect Jason to, uphold the agreement. I don't expect Jason to make it mature, but I do expect God.
Yes.
And so if I move that way, when it does come, wherever it comes from, I'm just grateful. I didn't look like you were supposed to do it because I did it for you, so you're supposed to do it for me.
Man, you're such a blessing. It's an infinite rate of return, and what we do does echo against the backdrop of all of eternity.
Yes.
And sometimes you'd be so focused just on the minimal, short term. Even in years, it could be long term. But man, if it's against the backdrop of all of eternity,
Yeah.
the return on that for me, I would love it to be somewhere else, and I'd love it to be in heaven,
Right.
And so it may not show up here. You're reaping down here, but man, my storehouses are somewhere else.
Absolutely.
And as many people as possible
Well said.
ought to have access to it, have the awareness to it. So if people wanted to, first of all, thank you again for coming here and just sharing your story, sharing your life, insights. If people want to find out more about Reggie Flowers and what Reggie Flowers is involved in,
Yes.
how can they find you? How can they get access to you? Where would they go?
The fastest way to get all the access to me would probably go to my Instagram, which is at IamReggieFlowers.com. I mean, not .com, but just IamReggieFlowers. There you get access to Kingdompreneur. You get access to Flowers Equity Partners. You can see some of the content, the podcast, which once we beef up our situation, we'll invite you on too. So we have a real podcast here. But that's the easiest way to get a hold. Right now I'm in a season from coming from behind the curtain to back out front. And that's why these opportunities I'm grateful for, because I just needed to be right now, just a servant. Right now we don't have a huge production. We weren't big on being on front of the camera. So no matter how much success you have worldly, you still have to approach everything with the principles, understanding seed, time, and harvest.
Yes.
So right now I'm sowing seeds. Right? You will always sow seeds when you're beginning something new.
Yes.
And then we'll let time happen. So if I just continue to move forward without the expectation of when and just focus on until, then the harvest will show up. And then we'll be grateful for the harvest, and we'll continue to do the process over and over again.
That's awesome. It's amazing. Before we go, you're going to grab one of these stickers. You see the stickers on the table?
Yes.
And go ahead and sign the sticker and place it where God is calling you to place that sticker on this table.
Oh, my pleasure.
It's been a great conversation. I love you sharing your life. I love the example that you're providing for other people, and your willingness to share it, the way that you share it, your demeanor about it is going to serve so many people so well. So again, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And always ride the wave of life, and always play big.